Alright, how's it going, everybody? Hope you're having a good day. Now, this video is published a little bit late, but you see the banned and restricted announcement. So, Agent of Treachery is banned in Historic from Suspended. Winota Joint of Forces is banned in Historic. Fires is banned from Suspended. Nexus of Fate, which is a card right here. Now, I know you're probably expecting Temur Reclamation. And I do want to highlight that in a second, so we're going to jump to Temur Reclamation, and then we're going to come back. Because a lot of people in Standard want Temur to be banned, and there's actually stats to prove this. I played in the Red Bull tournament that had 2,060 players. 2,060. We finished 187. So we were the 9%, the top 9%. We also represented the third best gruul deck, and I'll put those results up here. Also want to talk about Temur Rec for a second. As you see those results highlighted right there, we were 3-1 versus Temur Reclamation. We were 2-0 versus Sultai. I decided not to split with our opponent. We could have split and made it a higher ranking. I chose not to do that. We both chose, actually, after talking, chose not to do that. So we finished in the top 9%. Now look at Temur Reclamation. In one tournament at Star City, it was the number one deck. Literally, it was the number one deck being played at Star City, at the Star City qualifier. In fact, it was the first and second best deck. It represented 4 out of 5 top 8 decks. Now, if you look at the Red Bull, it almost looks like the same thing. You have the 2 top decks being Temur Reclamation. And then, of course, 5 out of top 8 being Temur Reclamation. Temur Reclamation at the Red Bull untapped. And by the way, 2,060 players is a big sample size. That's a big sample, guys. It had a 55.6% win rate. Right around that 55% mark is where they start to look at bannings. Atypically. So not only was it played with the consistency, but it also had the win rate. This is getting into Oko territory. People mainboarding Ether Gust. I mean, we saw this with Oko. Now, let's go back to the banning and restricted announcements. And Historic also running free emissary. I just think a lot of people wanted Wilderness Reclamation, and there's a good argument for that. The way it was played both in Star City, which had 149 players, but in the Red Bull, over 2,000 players. And they're both number 1, number 2. By the way, our gruul deck, only 31 gruul decks were played out of 2,000 people, so that's like 1.5% of the format was only gruul. We were the third best gruul deck. In fact, you can actually see in Star City, compared to the Red Bull to Star City, our gruul deck is one of the top gruul decks in the format. Okay, so also what was banned is Nexus of Fate in Historic. So take an extra turn after this one. If Nexus of Fate would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Nexus of Fate and shuffle it into its owner's library. Yeah, so if you play Modern, you know what this card is, Nexus of Fate. It's ran in like an infinite combo type of deck. A little bit too much for Historic to handle. Burning Tree-emissary, when it comes into play, you add 2 mana. So basically, you get a 2/2 for free, basically. In Pioneer, unbanned is Oath of Nissa. And of course, that's whenever knows. So you can read that for yourself. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you can look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature, land, or planeswalker card from among them. and put one into your hand. So it pretty much says it's kind of like a Once Upon a Time wrapped up in an Oath of Nissa. That's basically what it is. Like before Once Upon a Time was printed, in a weird way, this is like a 1-drop Once Upon a Time for green. In Modern, Arcum's Astrolabe was banned, and we'll go through the reasons. It enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and then you pay 1 generic mana, tap it, add 1 mana of any color. This was from Modern Horizons. So on the surface, this doesn't look like that bad of a card, right? Arcum's Astrolabe. Modern Horizons common. But in Modern, this has a lot of loops. It's a 1-drop, so it's snow covered. You have to have a snow covered mana source to be able to produce this. But in Modern Horizons, every land was pretty much snow covered. So people in Modern have a lot of snow covered land. And so when this enters the battlefield, you draw a card, but then you can pop it for a mana of any color. And then there's like recurring factors. Now consider Urza, Lord Artificer. You can tap an artifact to produce a mana. So essentially, do you see the interactions between Arcum's Astrolabe with Urza, Lord Artificer? Yeah, you start to see like, oh wow, that's why it was banned. Right? You can kind of see that. All right. So then we go down to Expedition Map and Pauper. I'm not going to cover Pauper too much because it's pretty much a format that nobody really... I mean, it's a format that I actually would be interested in. But at the same time, it just doesn't have the support where I live. In fact, I can only think of 2 people that actually play Pauper out of a lot of people that I know. But anyway, Expedition Map, if you weren't around, it says pay 2, sacrifice Expedition Map. You search your library for a land card, and I'll get to explanations and rationales in a minute. Reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So you search your library for a land card. And that's the big thing, right? A land card. So it could be any land. That's the problem with Expedition Map. Heavily used in Modern in the Tron decks. With like Ugin, Karn Liberated. Does that start to make sense to you? But in Pauper, you have to understand that you can't play with Ugin and Karn. Okay. Mystic Sanctuary. So this is a common land from Aldrain. It's worth $1. But when it enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield tapped, unless you control 3 or more other lands. When it enters the battlefield untapped, you may put a target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. These all take an effect on MTG Arena July 16th, 2020. That's the important part, right? Because tabletop Magic is pretty much non-existent right now. And if you're playing tabletop Magic, let's be honest, you're not playing in a tournament right now because of everything going on in the world. So you can pretty much play with whatever you want. Okay, so the rationale in Historic. Let's go over it really quick. We currently have 3 cards suspended in Historic: Winota, Joiner of Forces, Agent Treachery, and Fires of Intervention. As with all suspensions, we're carefully watching how the changes affected the Historic meta. And our data is showing it distinctly improves with those cards removed. Each of these are also cards that tend to be more problematic as the format grows in the breadth. So basically what they're trying to say is basically this. The more stuff that we print going forward, going ahead, these cards are going to get much worse. Agent of Treachery, Winota, Forces, and Fires. Again, this is for Historic. Nothing in Standard, nothing was banned. Nothing was banned. It says because we feel the data shows a positive impact from the current suspensions, and because it is unlikely to be safe to reintroduce these cards to Historic anytime. Winota, Agent of Treachery, and Fires are banned in Historic. Though these suspensions, now bans, improve the metagame, the top end of Historic is still becoming too restricted. Shortly after the suspension, Winota joined our forces. The top 2 decks comprise roughly 15% of the best of 3 play, showing a healthy, diverse spread of decks. Now the top 2 decks are roughly 35%, and the concentration is increasing. Well, we can make an argument that Wilderness Reclamation is doing that in Standard. I just gave you the stats. Actually, I'll give you the true stats of the Red Bull tournament. And why am I focusing on the Red Bull tournament? Well, number one, we played in it. Full coverage of that, by the way. Go to my Twitch channel or go to YouTube, subscribe, and also follow, by the way. Full live stream of that match, of all those things going on there. Again, so a 55.6% win rate was Wilderness Reclamation. Temur Reclamation. Also, there's a 4-color Temur with Teferi Time Raveler, and its win rate was 53%. Mono Green came in having a really highly, out of all the aggro decks, a 55.2% win rate. And because Heroic Intervention, all the board wipes, well, you just give your creatures protection, and that pretty much helps. So, all your creatures become indestructible. Now let's get back to the thing. Okay, over the last month, decks using Nexus of Fate have risen dramatically in terms of the metagame share, and it's now Historic's most played deck. And again, you can go back to Wilderness Reclamation being the most played deck, as evidenced by the last 5 tournaments. Temur Reclamation has been the number 1 deck. The 2 main cards enabling the deck are Wilderness Reclamation. Okay, so not only the best card in Standard, but now Nexus of Fate is being played in Wilderness Reclamation in Historic, which is now the most played deck in Historic. We're starting to see a pattern with Wilderness Reclamation, aren't we? The 2 main cards enabling the deck are Wilderness Reclamation and Nexus of Fate itself. While Reclamation is a powerful card, we are not seeing it appear in problematic decks in Historic aside from this one. Again, nothing happened in Standard, so this is completely acknowledging Historic, okay? This deck also runs multiple ways to accelerate to early casts of Nexus of Fate, and those options will only expand with the format. Finally, Wilderness Reclamation acts primarily to give players access to a wider array of lines of play, while Nexus of Fate acts to prevent opponents from playing at all. From both a long health and gameplay standpoint, we feel that Nexus of Fate is better to act on here. Okay, and you can kind of go, and they go on and say Nexus of Fate is a card we've been watching closely for a long time in Historic. Nexus of Fate is much like the cards discussed above, where its power will only grow as the Historic card pool expands. And that's what I'm getting at, guys. They're looking at the long term. Like, the cards that are going to come out in the next future sets, they're saying is Winota and Nexus of Fate are just going to continue just to get more powerful and more powerful and more powerful. So you can read up on all this if you want to. Put this on pause. But we can kind of go, you can read this, but I just want to cover this really quick. The other deck that has been a long powerhouse in Historic is Gruul Aggro. I did not know that. I don't play Historic. While it has too often been the most played deck, the separation between it and other top decks has been widened significantly in the last month. Gruul and Nexus are each now played more than 3 times as much as their closest competition in the best of 3. And Gruul has one of the highest win rates in both best of 3 and best of 1. After considering the deck and the surrounding meta, we feel that the best card to act on here is Burning Tree-emissary. And again, basically, this card right here, just by looking at it, I've never played with this card. But it's a free creature. In a gruul deck, that's free. Because in gruul, you're always going to be using your mana base. So you drop down a 2/2, and you get 2 mana back. And then I can easily say that you could, pop this down. So it's a free creature, basically. It's like a, like a Mox Emerald, like you can enter the battlefield for free. That's kind of like what this is doing, essentially, when I just look at this card. Okay. Let's go on to Pioneer. Okay, since the loss of Pioneer last year, so we're going to highlight this part right here. We've seen significant changes in the metagame. Early in Pioneer's launch window, various ramp green decks were among the most popular and successful archetypes. In order to reduce the consistency of these decks, Oath of Nissa was added to the ban list early in the progression of Pioneer. Since that time, other cards used by green ramp decks have been banned, including Once Upon a Time, Veil of Summer, and Oko, Thief of Crowns. In addition, the release of the new sets has added power to other archetypes and generally expand possibilities for deck building. The metagame is now in a place where we feel the unbanning of Oath of Nissa is a reasonable step as far as adding some power back to Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. Ramp decks and other archetypes that revolve around key creature lands or planeswalkers. We are otherwise generally happy with the shape of the metagame in Pioneer, with the most played decks each having strengths and weaknesses against each other. We're keeping an eye on populations of combo decks in the environment, although the perception that combo decks have been dominant win rates isn't backed up by Magic Online play data. We are seeing a variety of lesser played decks having success, which indicates the metagame may continue to shift. Okay, Modern. I'm not going to read the Pauper, because this is just going to become too long. Okay, over the last several months of Modern's metagame, we've seen a rise in popularity and win rate of multicolored decks using Arcum's Astrolabe, with variants approaching 55% non-mirror match win rate. What did I tell you that Wilderness Reclamation had? 55.6. 55.6 is higher than 55. Okay. While these decks have taken on several different forms, their common game plan is using Arcum's Astrolabe to play powerful cards across several colors. Doesn't that sound like Wilderness Reclamation to you? In Standard? That last sentence. Their common game plan is using to play several powerful cards across several colors. That sounds like Fires of Intervention and Wilderness Reclamation to me. As a result, Arcum's Astrolabe has become one of the most cards in Modern. You can make the argument for Wilderness Reclamation. Okay. So while there's nothing intrinsically bad about multicolored good stuff, decks having a place in the metagame, their power and flexibility is usually counterbalanced by making concessions in their mana bases. Again, you can make a point that Wilderness Reclamation, who cares about your mana base because everything untaps. Often through lands that enter the battlefield tapped, cost life, and involve some other deck building restrictions. Arcum Astrolabe makes this trade-off come as too low of a cost, as one of Ostrom's Arcolabes can often mean excellent mana for the rest of the game without costing a card. In addition, Arcum's Astrolabe, and again it's not showing it, leads to other synergy by the virtue of cheap artifact permanent, and it can be blinked and reoccurred for card advantage. In short, Arcum Astrolabe adds too much to these decks for too little to cost, resulting in win rates that are unhealthy and unsustainable for the metagame. Therefore, it's banned in Modern. They're also keeping their eye on Astrolabe in Legacy. Okay, and for Pauper, you can go ahead and read that. I'll leave this screen up for you. And but let's just take a note on standard. After careful review of the metagame, we're choosing not to make any changes to standard at this time. Player Tour Online 3 and 4 saw the overall win rates and Day 2 conversion rates of the most played decks, Ramp and Temur, come down to healthier levels. Maybe this was written before the tournaments took off. But again, it saw a 55.6% win rate. And it was the most played. In the weeks following, we've seen other archetypes rise in popularity and win rate, including mono green aggro. I agree with that. Mono green aggro. Rakdos sacrifice. I agree with that. Mono black aggro. I agree. Simic Flash. I have a video on Simic Flash, by the way, and others. Core Set 2021 has brought a variety of new tools, and generally we're seeing steady motion in the metagame leading up to the Players' Tour finals. While we agree the concerns with gross bow ramp decks in aggregate have recently represented a larger than ideal portion of the meta, we do see different archetypes within that large category having differently in terms of strengths, weaknesses, and roles in the metagame. With signs of the metagame shifting away from ramp in recent weeks, I showed you the stats of the tournaments. The release of Core Set 2021 in Standard, with the rotation coming in the fall, we've decided to allow the metagame to continue its natural evolution. So basically, what I take from that is look, we have rotation coming up here. Very interesting. Look at the last prepositions of the sentence. Standard with rotation coming in the fall. We've decided to allow the metagame to continue its natural evolution. And I think that's the key sentence for those wondering about bannings in Standard. I think that's going to be... sometimes they save the best for last. I think that's the last sentence you need to pay attention to in relation to Standard. Right? As you can see, this was a very long write-up. I do appreciate the time that this person did take to do this write-up, because it took me just a long time just to read it to you. Hope that covers everything. And again, I'll cover Temur Reclamation in another video and why it's so important. Again, feel free to follow if you want to, and also subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Twitch. Also subscribe to me here. All the links will be in the descriptions below. Guys, I hope you have a good day. Until next video, I'll see you.